Oke, shalom Bapak Ibu jemaat yang dikasihi Tuhan. Saya percaya saudara semua sehat, diberkati Tuhan dan selalu bersuka cita ya. Baik, hari ini kita akan meneruskan Family Discipleship Time dengan topik Making Marriage Work ya. Tentunya beberapa dari kita sudah membahas tentang session pertama tentang the myth. Dan saya mendengar beberapa masukan, sangat menikmati ya sharingnya. Teruskan ini ya menjadi bahan sharing dengan pasangan atau dipakai dalam oikos masing-masing. Supaya kita bisa digest, ya kita bisa terbuka dan kita semakin disadarkan dan diperlengkapi lebih lagi menjadi keluarga yang lebih baik dan lebih dipulihkan. Nah, malam hari ini kita akan belajar tentang sesi kedua, tentang the pressure in marriage. Ya, ternyata dalam pernikahan itu ada banyak pressure, tekanan, dan kita perlu handle, kita perlu kelola pressure dengan baik. Oke, saudara, saya akan share screen. Saudara bisa nikmati, take notes, dan nanti bisa sharing di keluarga saudara dan di oikos saudara. Thank you, Tuhan memberkati.
Hi, I'm Catherine.
And I'm Kendall. Welcome to Making Marriage Work.
No matter how wonderful your marriage is, it's not invincible. Bad things happen to even the best marriages.
That's why we have relationship experts Les and Leslie Parrott again today. To the co-directors of the Center for Relationship Development, a groundbreaking program that teaches the basics of good Christian relationships.
Our first story comes from Nashville. Few things in life can cause more pain and pressure in a marriage than infidelity.
I think when we first married, I expected, like most newlyweds do, for it to be wonderful and easy every day living. And frankly, the routine sets in. You have bills to pay, you get sick, you have to clean house, you have doctor's appointments, you have a job to get up and go to, the laundry needs doing, life goes on. And it is everything but romantic. And I think after a few years, I realized I'm happy, I love this man, but this is not what I thought it was going to be like. The stress of having young children at home and caring for them certainly robs a marriage of romance if you're not working towards it.
I quite immediately began getting all of my affirmation and all of my esteem at the office. I was enjoying spending more time with my assistant than I was with my wife. My assistant was feeling more comforting to me for different struggles that I was having at home. And the bottom line is I just let my guard down and let my affections wander, and I had an affair.
I just remember thinking something's wrong, and I couldn't put my finger on it.
And I called Wendy and said our being married was never right to begin with, and while I felt horrible that we had a couple of kids, I just emotionally would feel worse subjecting her to years of an unfruitful marriage and blah, 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 blah.
And he was very cold and very indifferent. And I thought, this is bizarre. You are not the man I thought I married. How can you be saying these things to me? You're a Christian on top of it. And I realized my world as I know it has just ended.
Once infidelity has hit a marriage, the natural question is, can this marriage survive?
Right.
And I gotta say, I'm very optimistic about this. Am I optimistic about it happening overnight? No, that's a scar on the relationship. But this is something they can overcome. So let me offer a suggestion to the spouse that has been in an affair and how to get through this, to slog through this. And that is, number one, foremost, cut off all ties with this person that you have been with. Secondly, open yourself up to your partner to answer any questions that he or she may have. It's okay for them to ask. Not that they need to know every detail. Most don't want to. But you need to be willing to share whatever it is that is weighing on their heart. So cut off those ties, open yourself up to be vulnerable, and then stay present with that person. If you feel like they're attacking you, it's going to be tempting to be defensive. let your guard down, stay fully present with that person to work through this. You know, they're carrying that pain. You've got to help them through it.
And for the spouse who remained faithful and discovered their partner had had an affair, there's a lot of work to be done, both internally and on the marriage, too. I mean, I think one of the things that spouse has to determine in the midst of their grief and their questions is, how much information do I really want? Don't torture yourself by asking for information that would only damage you in the long run. So think carefully about that. And every time you see one of your partner's flaws, it's going to be easy to bring this up again and add this to the wound. And that's something you just have to determine not to do. Sometimes when we're the faithful partner, we can kind of be like the older brother in the prodigal son, and use that as a place of resentment no matter what marriage issue comes up on a day-to-day basis, and we have to determine not to do that. But thirdly, we need to be so compassionate with ourselves. Grieving is complex, it's multifaceted, and it takes time. We are going to go through phases, probably everything from denial and anger and sometimes a deep depression over the losses we've suffered before we come to a place of forgiveness and acceptance. And we need to give ourselves space and time to let ourselves go through all those phases. It's really God's design for healing.
And it will all come down for both partners to that word that Leslie just mentioned, and that's forgiveness.
Right.
Forgiving the hurts that we don't deserve. And that takes, obviously, grace, and that takes work, again, of the Holy Spirit to do that through us. This is not a natural act. Forgiveness is an unnatural act for the human spirit to do on its own. And so forgiveness, and this is something, it's a gift that we're offering this person. It's, I'm giving up my right to hurt you back. And that's a challenge, but it's key, it's central, obviously, to helping a couple that's been through this kind of trauma.
The healing process after a time of utter betrayal like that is not easy. It probably took me a year before I didn't wonder every time Jeff walked out the door, is he coming home?
I asked Wendy's forgiveness and told her that I realized that I had committed the most grievous act that a husband ever could commit against his wife and family, and asked for forgiveness.
It's not something I could conjure up in myself. I know I prayed, I asked the Lord, please help me forgive this man, help me make it right for the sake of our children, for the sake of our marriage. When Jeff and I really had recommitted our lives to one another, we realized that there were going to be some things that we had to change, because we couldn't go on as though we had had nothing ever happen.
You know, our hearts go out to any couple who has suffered the jolt of infidelity in their relationship. Few things rock a boat more than that in marriage. But we have lessons to learn from these couples. Right. You know, these couples that have brought it back together after that. What can we do to prevent this from happening to our marriages? Well, there's a lot of things that we can do to protect our love, to guard our hearts.
Yeah, and I think one of those is be wise about ourselves. Don't live in denial and think, you know, I could never fall into that trap.
Another suggestion is to stay clear of needy relationships, these relationships where you know this person is vulnerable because of their own relationship or their lack of a relationship. If you find yourself being drawn to this kind of person, draw a boundary line, get some accountability, and recognize this is not a safe place to be.
And lastly, don't meet people in private places.
Even if that relationship has a purpose, a business purpose or what have you, it still needs to be done in a setting that is recognized as this is appropriate.
Right.
Well, these are a few safeguards. There's plenty of others. People need to guard their hearts in marriage, or else we fall victim, we fall prey to this very toxic experience of infidelity.
Protecting our hearts and our actions is essential in preserving our marriages.
It is encouraging to know that if both partners will work at it, a marriage can survive infidelity.
But it'll take a lot of time and grace. And there are other situations that can cause undue pressure or grief in a relationship, such as the loss of a child.
We always knew we wanted to have as many children as the Lord would allow us to have.
And when it didn't happen, we got a little nervous, but we continued to try.
Gary had already begun to go to some of the adoption agencies and inquire about what that process would be. Me, on the other hand, because I knew that I was pregnant, I was searching for cards for me to write, a little note to Gary on a card.
The adoption information went to the trash can, and we got excited about being pregnant.
Until we get ready to go for the first ultrasound. They determined that eventually I'm going to lose this baby. The second pregnancy loss was a set of twins.
The second time was pretty soon after the first.
It was truly again on the examination table with the ultrasound.
And I can just remember thinking, it's happening again. We had a third miscarriage, and after the third one, the doctors told Alina she just needed to let her body rest. And that really was the time that I think that we struggled most.
He would recognize that I would be a lot more distant. At the drop of a hat, I would start crying.
During that 1 year waiting period when we really should have just been resting, I was counting down the months almost to when we could actually get started.
He kept pulling things out of me, and I wouldn't want to express how I was feeling at that moment. I didn't know whether or not I even wanted children. I didn't want the heartbreak. Since then, the doctors, because of having 3 miscarriages, 4 babies lost, they determined that I was never going to be able to carry a baby full term. Because he had been pressing me on what was the matter, it just all came out in a volcanic eruption, and I was ready to attack by way of words, and he just sat there the entire time. He listened. Normally, because he's a male, he tries to add that fix-it aspect to things. He didn't say a word. All he could do was give me his handkerchief and hold my hand.
I don't think anyone grieves more than over the loss of a child. It just seems unnatural. Or an illness that, is a terrible thing for your spouse or for you. Or even just debt that can, financial reverses that devastate you. And there's a whole laundry list of things couples face that are devastating. And what we've discovered as we walk through these really difficult circumstances with some couples is the best thing you can do for your marriage in times of grief and heartache is keep the channels of communication open. Our styles of grieving are so different, and sometimes our styles of coping are so different, and we alienate each other at the time when we need each other most. And there's no way to walk through that and stay connected soul to soul without good channels of communication. It's really the lifeblood of surviving those crises.
We've been married just over 4 years. My wife has a daughter of our previous marriage, and her ex-husband, his new wife, just really hates my wife, hates our daughter's mom. They wanted to be our daughter's parents, period, paragraph, end of story.
It was devastating. And I think he felt that I had been violated and there was nothing that he could do about it. So we were both in pain over just kind of different reasons. And I couldn't help him and he couldn't help me.
I mean, we struggled because it was her daughter and I was just her husband. And, ultimately at the end of the day, I'm in a losing position. I'm not going to win that fight.
How could he understand? He doesn't have a child.
I get jealous because I feel like I don't own my wife, not an ownership, piece of furniture context, but, my wife and I should have a relationship that is our relationship.
I was spending so much time and energy being angry at the situation that I wasn't spending any time on my husband or our relationship.
There's a unique set of issues and needs that these couples have, particularly when it comes to blending a family, bringing kids into this relationship, and all of a sudden it's instant family for one partner or the other.
Yeah, blending a family is a big challenge for second couples, but also really making sure you're ready for a second marriage. And as a couple in a second marriage, making sure you've taken ownership for cleaning your slate from some of the residue you may have with you from your first marriage. And by the way, even if your first marriage ended with the death of a spouse, because sometimes we tend to idealize that person and they seem so heroic compared to this very real person we're now married to. And no matter how your first marriage ended, it really does take some work to take ownership and create a new marriage between the two of us.
And let me say this, these second marriages have a higher divorce rate than first-time marriages, significantly so. And we know that it takes a minimum of 3 years, typically more like 6 years, till a blended family in particular feels like they've reached any sense of equilibrium. So these couples need to give this time, and most of those divorces happen in the first 2 years. We've made a mistake here.
Right.
Well, no, they've got to acquire a new set of skills, and that's why we urge anybody in this situation, if they need it, to seek some professional help. Get a good counselor that can give them those skills and teach them with new tools how to navigate this new water.
We'll be right back with more Making Marriage Work after this brief message.
I shouldn't even be here. I have a wife and a family, but I can't help myself. How can something that feels so good be wrong? My wife is starting to get suspicious. All the time we've been spending together. All those late nights. Just you and me. When it feels like you're the only one in the world who understands me. You're beautiful. I can't take my eyes off you. You're wonderful.
Welcome back to Making Marriage Work. We're talking about how to survive when the pressures of life squeeze your marriage.
Your marriage is worth fighting for, not just because quitting is so painful, but because the rewards of sticking it out are so great.
Let's go back to our experts, Les and Leslie Parrott.
You know, the number one complaint that couples have in their marriages that they bring to a marriage counselor is we just don't communicate. You know, it's just we just don't communicate like we used to. And you know, before couples got married, that's all they did was communicate. Once they cross that proverbial threshold, it seems like something happens that breaks down. We have these communication meltdowns.
The day we got back from our honeymoon, he quit his job. He was working Saturdays and evenings and everything, and he said, if I don't get out now, I'll never get out.
And that's when I started getting really involved with the singles ministry at the church we were attending. As I got more involved, the more of an interest I had in doing something along the lines of ministry.
And that is what sparked everything.
The singles minister there was very helpful. He said, you know, there's a church that wants to visit with you. I think you'd be a good match for them. Would you be interested? And I told Jennifer, I said, you know, let's just go. Let's just visit with them, have lunch, be ourselves. If they're interested, great. If not, you know, then we'll know.
So we just wanted to kind of go, get it over with, be polite, all that stuff. Well, they treated it completely as an interview. We're asking us all these questions, and I was just floored. I had no idea that that's what it was going to be. I don't know if Will had any idea and just didn't tell me.
I thought, you know, that the communication process was there where she knew this was something that we were kind of, or I was massaging as far as a consideration.
It just seemed like a whirlwind. I had no idea.
Well, where have you been in all this conversation?
Wait a minute, you just took this one class.
She knew that I had even considered doing mission work.
You know, we go just to not close the door, and then he gets offered this job, and we didn't even really know we were applying for it.
I remember specifically her saying, you know, I'm not coming in really to be these people's minister.
I was a teacher, and I only wanted to be a teacher, and I didn't want to have a second job.
And she said, I don't want to do this anymore.
One of the things Leslie and I have discovered is that when it comes to teaching communication skills, we're still focused on two fundamental skills that we're working on ourselves in our own relationship.
The first of these is really just clarifying content. It is so easy for us to jump to the conclusion that we know what our partner is saying to us, when in fact we've totally misunderstood. We haven't taken the time to clarify the content.
For the words that most people use in the English language, there are on average 3.5 different meanings per word.
One of the things I think couples often don't understand is it's not just talking that's communication. Silence is also a powerful form of communication. Not only is it powerful, but it's almost always a negative.
Second skill is a little more advanced, and that's to reflect feeling. Not just to clarify the content, but to reflect feeling. And that goes back to listening with the third ear. You know, listening not just to the verbiage, but listening to the emotions underneath that. When we do those two things, and we say, you know, that statement, sounds like you're feeling such and such.
Yeah, when you have that feeling that someone has just understood you in a way you haven't been understood all day or all week or maybe all your life, it is like a priceless treasure. And you feel like, I never want to leave the presence of a person who can help me know myself better and really understand me.
This is communication. It's our way of saying, let's get back to the fundamentals and do these things that we know how to do. Clarify content, reflect feeling.
We started the initial conversation of how are we going to work this out with me being in ministry versus what you need in our marriage, in compromise.
He was so thankful that I finally spoke up because it could have taken a bad turn.
She really felt that she was more important than the ministry. And I wanted her to feel that way.
All along, I knew I was supposed to be with him. And since all this has worked out and he has gone into the ministry, somewhere in there, it kind of makes me think, I'm supposed to be here too. If I'm supposed to be married to him and he's supposed to do this, I'm supposed to be a minister's wife.
So let's give a few more tips on what you can do in communication. One of those is to use I statements rather than you statements. And as you do that, you can say, you know, rather than saying, you always make us late, to say, I feel so frustrated when we're late. Or rather than saying, you never pick up your clothes, to say, I feel like our house is really a wreck if we don't pick up our clothes. Now, it's a subtle thing, but that simple transition from you to I makes a world of difference.
That's right. Not only do we need to make I statements, but we really need to be careful to practice reflective listening. You know, we've talked about it already, but really helping our partner understand that we know what they've said, they've been heard, and as we reflect those feelings and clarify the content of that conversation, that's how they know you got my message, and it's a really powerful thing. Now, in order to do that, I think we have to understand we have some fundamental differences. In fact, this is another communication tip. We have to understand the differences between men and women and how we communicate, because it's really different.
The number one goal that men have in conversation is not to build this sense of connectedness. That's the number one goal that women have, that bond of connectedness. For men, it's just simply to gather information. In fact, Deborah Tannen, that did the research on this, says that women are all about rapport. That's what she calls it, rapport talk. Men are all about report, getting that report.
Another important tip in communication for couples is to be willing to apologize when it's necessary. We really do need to humble ourselves sometimes and just say, I'm sorry, and be willing to admit we're wrong. Now, I have to say this with a caveat, because I know there's some people with a personality bent. We want to avoid conflict, and so we apologize prematurely just as a way to get the conversation over with so we don't have to hear in detail what we did wrong. And that's not a true apology.
It's difficult to humble ourselves and apologize when necessary. Well, one last suggestion, and that is tender touch. Sometimes words fail us, and a gentle touch, you know, with our partner can communicate more than words ever can. Well, all these suggestions can be helpful, but remember this: if you don't do it from a genuine heart, they will fall flat time and time again. This is not about techniques. This is about who you are more than what you do.
It's either my marriage or med school.
James McKnight, Liberty University. Once she met me, it ceased to be about Mickey. I think that more professional athletes probably would agree. Her life actually stops as she once knew it, and now she has a new identity. It's tough to be dependent on a husband, be dependent on his career, him making the team every year and earning a living, being dependent on him for everything.
James had a contract extension actually in Seattle the year we got married, so we bought a house there. No more than 6 months later, he was traded to Dallas. And so we moved to Dallas. I remember telling James, you know, they could have dropped us in Tokyo. You know, we are here where we have no family, no friends, no nothing.
We had made some great relationships, and we really felt like God was just beginning to use us more and more in our church home in Dallas.
And we're watching ESPN, and we find out, oh, Miami Dolphins have acquired James McKnight. And I'm looking at him like, honey, so now you're a Dolphin?
Everything that we worked so hard to build up in Dallas just came crumbling down.
I knew that I'm gonna be the one doing this. James is about to leave and go and work out. It gets hard because those nights when I'm packing up stuff and I'm just like, why am I doing this? It's his fault we're moving, you know, why can't he just stay somewhere and just be there?
Everything that she worked hard for was put on a shelf. And everything was about James. Everything was about her husband now. And that was, I think it was a hard pill for her to swallow. And it was hard on me because she wasn't happy.
How is it that some couples go through life and run into a jolt and seem to get through that and they're stronger than ever, while other couples come through that same jolt and fragment, they fall apart? That that question rather has intrigued us for so long. And not until we started writing this book, When Bad Things Happen to Good Marriages, did we realize what these couples are doing right. And one of the things they do right is to cultivate the right attitude. In fact, this attitude that we see in these couples, it's the steering wheel that they grab onto that determines the direction of their marriage, and it's vitally important.
Yeah, in fact, this attitude is so important because it doesn't depend on any external circumstances. It's cultivating the right attitude in spite of our circumstances, no matter what they might be, and choosing together. Really, we call it the habit of happiness.
In fact, if I could press a magic button for every couple in this country, in this world that wants to succeed in marriage, it would be to give them this capacity to adjust to things beyond their control, rise above it, and have a good attitude in spite of their circumstances.
Les and Leslie have given you some great tools to help cultivate the right attitude to survive the bad things that inevitably happen.
We've talked about the importance of clarifying content and reflecting feelings.
Those are the fundamentals of communication. They also talked about how to prevent and overcome infidelity. The key is to not put yourself in a situation where you might let your guard down.
You'll be talking about this more in your lesson.
If you'd like some more good reading on marriage from the Parrots, check out their book, Saving Your Marriage Before It Starts, and Saving Your Second Marriage Before It Starts.
See you next time.
Next time on Making Marriage Work.
Our fights get pretty intense.
Why can't you just notice that the trash stinks?
Look, I'm fine with this. I'm ready to move on.
Oh, it's all my fault then.
They can predict if a marriage will succeed or end in divorce based on nothing else but how the couple fights.
It's on right there.
You know, you don't feel like your emotions are safe with this person.
The number one source of conflict in marriage is money.
Deep down, I might have resented the fact that he wasn't providing the way I wanted to be provided for.
Once you realize you have a problem, it's easy to start blaming each other.
We're great roommates. We're great friends. We just don't have sex.
We need to be freed up from that blame-shame cycle and take ownership for this as a couple.
Conflict is inevitable, and that's why it's important that we learn how to fight a good fight.